Ramadan reminder.
Pleasure and pain. What is the way to pleasure? The goal to pleasure. Everyone wants to be happy, to be content, to feel the pleasure of this world. Now, scholars divide pleasure into two: the pleasure of this world and the pleasure of al-akhirah. So, this world is short. We all know that we're going to live it. We all know that we're going to die. So, the pleasure of this world is limited, whereas the pleasure of our akhirah is vast, where we are not going to die, and that is our home. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us Jannah. Now, this pleasure we are having, how can we attain pleasure? Al-Imam al-Ghazali and others, when they're talking about pleasure, pleasure is found in fulfilling the interest and the intent of a Sharia, of Deen. Because Sharia came for the purpose of preserving the intellect, and that's why drinking alcohol is haram, preserving the lineage, وشرف العرض وحفظ العرض, and that's why it is haram to fornicate, adultery, and all the means which can lead to that. Also, it came to preserve wealth. That's why stealing is haram. To preserve ad-dam, the blood and the soul and nafs of human beings, and that's why killing is haram. Now, in preserving all that is pleasure. And pleasure has channels. Instead of going to do haram, do halal, marry. وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. Riba is haram. But then business and trade is halal. So our soul has desires. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has channeled the desires into halal channels that you will attain pleasure and your soul will be content and relaxed. In the contrary, if you go against the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your soul will be in distress. You will be in pain, however much you attain pleasure. Young men going out in clubs, doing whatever they're doing, subhanallah, however much you try to get pleasure out of that, after that pleasure goes, you go in pain, you go in stress. You want to go and have fun at night, do whatever you want to do at night, you can go, but what will happen to that pleasure? It will only last for seconds. The pleasure of doing haram will only last for minutes and for seconds. And after that pleasure, there is pain, there is stress, there is anxiety and depression. That's why the pleasure of this world is not attained in doing haram things. It's attained in fulfilling the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and abstaining from evil. That's the pleasure and the real pleasure of the soul. Al-Imam Sa'id al-Nusi, he divides it and says, al-ladha ad-dunyawiyya wal-ladha al-akhirah. There is a ladha in this dunya, there is pleasure in this dunya, and there is pleasure in akhirah. So when you see the gardens, kawnullah, tajalliyat kawnullah, you see the kawn, the world of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creations of Allah, how beautiful they are. The pleasure you get, you remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has more in Jannah. That this pleasure, if this is what we are feeling in dunya, then what we will feel in akhirah is more and more. And if there is pain in this dunya, this pain will go and we will have the pleasure of our akhirah. So the way to pleasure is through halal means. You can never attain pleasure by attaining material life. For example, ikhwati fillah, when you have wealth, someone has accumulated an amount of wealth, $100,000, $100 million. If that 100 million decreases, if that 100,000 decreases, to 50 to 30. People are sad, in distress, in depression, because what you had has decreased. So the pleasure you had went into pain. But again, there is someone who has nothing. When he attains what you call pain, it is pleasure for him. So what you may feel that you are in pain may be pleasure for someone else. The only way to go aware of that, to attain full pleasure in this world, al-ladha al-ma'nawiyya, is to believe, to know that whatever you get is from Allah, and if you lose it, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you more in akhirah. That you are in a struggle in this world. You are trying hard, yes, you're trying your best, but sometimes you lose what you had. But if you lose it, you have not lost everything. You still have a lot. And that should not cause you pain. You have a house. You eat, you sleep, but still you're in pain. You think that you're in pain because you have something in mind which you should attain. Now, Islam tells you to work hard. Work hard to attain your goals in dunya. Work hard to achieve what you want in this dunya in a halal way. And if you don't reach it, do not stress yourself. Don't be in pain. Remember, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not granted you that, He will grant you more. وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. Do not admire unlawfully what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted others, because that is going to cause you distress and pain. Whereas when you look at those who are under you, who are underprivileged, disadvantaged, you will be in pleasure. Look at those who are below you in terms of this dunya, and not look at those who are above you, and that is the way of pleasure, الطريق للذة. And that pleasure which you get today, which you feel now, the believers, the pleasure they feel, is a way to the pleasure of akhirah. That's why Al-Imam Ibn Taymiyyah says that fil Jannah, fil dunya Jannah. In this dunya, there is paradise, there is Jannah. If you don't enter it, you will not enter the paradise of Al-Akhirah. That feeling you feel when you're in sujood, the pleasure you get when you're making dua, the pleasure you get when you're patient with what you're going through, that pleasure you get is Jannah, is paradise. And if you get that, then you will get the pleasure of Al-Akhirah. In contrary, the pain you cause whenever you think that there is no Al-Akhirah, what gives us comfort? Why is that suicide? Why is it that suicide is limited or is zero in Muslim communities? Because they believe in life after here. And why is suicide rampant? Why are people anxious in non-believing communities, non-Islamic communities? It's because they don't believe in the hereafter. They only believe in this dunya, and that causes pain. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us pleasure in this dunya and pleasure in al-akhirah. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ramadan reminder: